The South African government has put a new focus on township economic development to help enhance income and strengthen asset accumulation. But what are the economic drivers in townships? Well, digital marketing agency Rogerwilco has done a survey on this, and CEO Charlie Stewart joins me on the show. Thank you very much for your time, Charlie. Of course, you have done this big research just to understand the township economy. And just starting off, we do know that COVID-19 necessitated us moving away from cash payments, where we were encouraged to use our cards, and there are all these other payment platforms, fintech companies coming into that space. But yet, most people in the townships are using cash as a form of payment. Why?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think that cash remains king. I think there are probably a number of different subtexts there. There's an element of, I think, sort of operability. It's very easy for people to utilize cash. There are some people who probably want to remain undocumented or keep their business activities under the radar. But I suspect that there's also a significant challenge with financial education. A lot of the response we got back indicated that people still remain reticent to deal with banks, partly because of concerns maybe around banking transaction fees. They're not that high, but I think there's an educational message that needs to be delivered there. I think security too remains a bit of a concern. So I believe that if the banks, and I know they've invested heavily in their financial education programs over the last few years, but I suspect they're more centered around the mid to affluent marketplace. I mean, if you ask somebody in a township environment for a CVV code, if they're making an online payment, I think you'll be met with a look of incomprehension by many. So definitely opportunities to further improve financial education.
And just talking about that financial education, we do see a lot of South Africans in the townships still using store cards to buy clothes. I mean, does there need to be a change in education, a change in mentality here, considering that a lot of people living in the townships are not earning nearly as much money to be able to afford that credit and those interest payments?
Yes, and I think that was one of the disturbing, worrying features of the research. Over 85% of the sample of the about 1,100 people we interviewed got a household income of less than 3,000 rand. And it's clearly been impacted by COVID, by people losing jobs, by people taking less money home. And there are real pressures. And we saw this impacting the manner in which the products that people are spending their money on. And that ran right across the standard gambit of products that we would normally expect people to buy. But it really impacted some of the staples. 56% of the people we interviewed said that they were buying less maize meal or pup than they were a year ago. Now that's a core staple. So, for people to borrow money to buy luxury items just simply is not going to happen right now if they can't afford to put food on the table.
And just talking about that move in terms of what people are buying in groceries actually brings me back to a conversation that we had a few months ago where we had inflation numbers coming out, and we had moms from different parts of Gauteng basically saying that they have seen a change in behavior in terms of the kind of groceries that they are buying. One mom actually said that she stopped using whole wheat bread and actually goes for brown bread now. But something very interesting stood out for me. The fact that people are buying more fast food in poorer households. Why? What's the reason for that?
It wasn't so much that they're buying more fast food, it was just that we saw a lower drop-off in the amount of money that's being spent on fast food. And I think it's simply that for many people, and I think there's also a misconception here, fast food in a township context doesn't mean McDonald's or Burger King. It might mean buying, walkie-talkies, buying chicken feed. And, it's convenient, it's relatively cheap. You might spend 10 Rand and, get yourself a wholesome meal. So a combination of the convenience, combination of the costs of, buying paraffin or buying electricity in order to cook at home need to be weighed up against the convenience of being able to buy cheap, affordable food on the side of the street.
And we're actually also seeing a dominance in terms of supermarkets. More people are buying out of supermarkets instead of spaza shop. Does this have anything to do with COVID-19, this change in trend?
I think it probably has more to do with depressed household incomes than it does with anything else. And yes, you're quite right. We saw that spaza shops, people were reported they were spending about 42% less in spaza shops, 49% less in street stalls. yet we saw a shift towards the supermarket. Now, it was particularly interesting, this, because in many instances, supermarkets are either on the outskirts of townships or outside of the township itself. So individuals are evidently having to weigh up, I suppose, the cost of convenience, the cost of transport against the price of the product they're buying. I know that a lot of the supermarkets discount heavily towards the end of the month when people get paid. So I suspect that the supermarkets are seeing an influx of traffic, when people have got cash in their wallets, but day-to-day purchasing still happens at the spaza or at the street stall.
And just walk me through the trends in terms of employment. Are people in the townships more likely to be owning their own businesses? How many are employed? And also just looking at side hustles, because we do know that a lot of people are going for side hustles. So what kind of side hustles are they going for?
Yeah, and I think this is a really interesting finding. I think most of us have historically felt that a side hustle is the preserve of somebody who has a job. Only 15% of the people we interviewed have got a job in formal employment. About 7.5% were self-employed, but 30% of people have got a side hustle. Now, that side hustle could be anything from selling a bit of food on the street. It could be, selling merchandise that might be going off to the local discount store and, operating an informal trading business. But it was really refreshing to see the culture of entrepreneurship, still alive and well in the townships.
What's the trend when it comes to e-commerce in the township? Are people starting to be receptive to that trend at the moment?
For me, it was probably the biggest surprise that we saw in the research. And, bearing in mind the very low levels of household income that the majority of our respondents had, we found that 28% of people had been buying products online over the course of the last year. Now, that's not too far off the across-the-board number for South Africa, where, in South Africa right now, about 30%, between 35% of people are shopping online. So it was really gratifying to see that e-commerce is reaching the townships. I think that the reason for that is smartphone penetration is fairly widespread across South Africa as a whole. Data costs are coming down. They still remain higher than perhaps we would like, but they're definitely reducing. But I think perhaps most importantly, we're beginning to see delivery and fulfillment services recognizing the scope of the township market and enabling people to buy and receive a product at their house, at their property.
And just talking about reach, Charlie, just walk me through, in terms of brands, how is brand penetration being seen in the township?
I think when it comes to marketing and the way that brands are engaging with township residents, it was very interesting to see that sort of traditional media still remains some of the primary sources of influence. So television commercials remain a go-to for influencing messages and helping build brand identity. I think it's probably fairly self-evident that the greatest source of influence comes from your friends, your family. We saw that micro-influencers, people who hold positions of authority in the township, were far more likely to convince residents to spend money than celebrity influencers. So, Kim Kardashian certainly isn't going to rock it in Soweto, but the local pastor might just do it for you if you're a brand. So I think there's a strong message here for organizations who want to communicate and market to township residents to start putting more money into building relationships with Kazi heroes, to running truly integrated campaigns. And another quite interesting finding from the survey was when we asked people what language they would like their advertising and marketing messages to be in, the resounding feedback was in English. About 70% of people said they wanted in English, only about 15% wanted brands to communicate with them in their own language. The rest didn't really.
Interesting that people say that they'd like to see adverts in English. Very, very interesting insights there. Thank you very much for walking us through that survey, really understanding the township economy. That was Charlie Stewart, the CEO at Rogerwilco.